Penguin Random House Audio presents 12 Stories by American Women. Edited by Arielle Zibrak. Read for you by Carolyn Hewitt, Catherine Ho, Karen Murray, Tanis Peranto, and Elena Ray. With an introduction written and read by Arielle Zibrak.
Introduction. The short story. Women writers in the almost 100-year period this anthology spans, 1830 to 1926, turned to the short story for many reasons. In 1830, the short story was a relatively new genre, and the first genre that we might consider to have been born in the United States. By 1926, it was a highly popular form that could be found in periodicals, anthologies, and collections by individual authors all over the world. The development of the techniques and characteristics of the American short story can be traced throughout the works that have been selected here, from sentimental satires to political fables, to supernatural tales, to mysteries, to realistic portrayals rooted in the particularities of their regional settings. Most literary historians date the emergence of the short story to the tales that appeared in Washington Irving's The Sketchbook, which was published in installments between 1819 and 1820, and included the story The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Edgar Allan Poe, one of the genre's earliest theorists, surmised that the strength of short stories was to be found in what he called their totality, a singular purpose and plot that carry the reader propulsively forward until the ending's final blow. For this reason, short stories also offered an ideal format for using fiction to make an urgent socio-political point. Works in this anthology like Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper, Rebecca Harding Davis's Life in the Iron Mills, and Zitkala-Ša's The Widespread Enigma Concerning Blue Star Woman raise awareness about different forms of injustice by highlighting the fictionalized experiences of individual women, despite the fact that women's publicly expressed political views had a tendency to ignite controversy. The short story form had a service to offer there, too. Short fiction was more likely to reach readers while escaping the notice of censorious reviewers and commentators. In the preface to a collection of ghost stories written between 1902 and 1937, Edith Wharton reflected that most purveyors of fiction will agree with me that the readers who pour out on the author of the published book such floods of interrogatory ink pay little heed to the isolated tale in a magazine. The downside of this equation was that, for the first half of the 19th century, short stories were not highly profitable endeavors for writers. As the periodical market expanded in the second half of the century, however, writers could more easily sell one-off tales to editors, tiding themselves over financially while they labored at more lucrative, long-form projects. This was especially appealing to female writers, who often had both less time and less money than their male counterparts, as short stories could be produced and read within the disconnected intervals of free time that made up most women's lives. In 1899, the writer Kate Chopin, who was a single mother to 6 children, told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, "When do I write? I am greatly tempted here to use slang and reply any old time. Bet that would lend a tone of levity to this bit of confidence, whose seriousness I want to keep intact if possible. So I shall say I write in the morning, when not too strongly drawn to struggle with the intricacies of a pattern, and in the afternoon, if the temptation to try a new furniture polish on an old table leg is not too powerful to be denied. Sometimes at night, though, as I grow older, I am more and more inclined to believe that night was made for sleep." Chopin's claim that her writing fits in at any old time, like a hobby rather than an occupation, should be taken both seriously and with a grain of salt. Chopin was a dedicated writer who worked at a constant pace and recorded the sales of her stories in a ledger, keeping tabs on what themes and formats won her the highest prices. But she was also a single mother and a woman living at the end of the 19th century, when the public nature of professional writing was still a somewhat dicey prospect for female writers who wanted to maintain their esteem in social circles. So, the paradoxical nature of Chopin's statement and status as an artist, both serious and not serious, in many ways mirrors the central paradox of the emergence of female authorship in the United States. American women have played a significant role in the creation of an American culture of letters for as long as that role has been minimized. In large part, this is because writing is a profession, and while women needed no encouragement to take up their pens, the United States has long had an aversion to female professionalism. Female literary professionalism in the United States. In some ways, the idea of an emergence of female authorship in the United States makes no sense. It was never the case that women were barred from authorship or relegated to the sidelines of the creation of an American literature. It is simply that their contributions have been so insistently overlooked, discredited, or left out of sweeping literary historical narratives, when in fact, women have been at the forefront of print culture in the United States since its beginnings. The 1650 collection of poetry, The 10th Muse, Lately Sprung Up in America, by Anne Bradstreet, was one of the earliest publications distributed in colonial America. Years later, Bradstreet publicly claimed to have had the work published against her will in a poem, The Author to Her Book, which includes the self-deprecating lines, "Thou ill-formed offspring of my feeble brain, who after birth didst by my side remain, till snatched from thence by friends less wise than true, who thee abroad exposed to public view." Ostensibly, Bradstreet denies any serious intention of trying to become a published author. Such a masculine aspiration, especially in her historical moment, would subject a woman to scorn and ostracism. Even 200 years later, when the novelist Harriet Beecher Stowe had become the most famous woman in America for writing Uncle Tom's Cabin, a book that nearly every literate American read, she claimed to not have written it at all, stating instead that God spoke through her pen. Stowe would also refuse to read publicly, preferring to observe popular prohibitions against female orators by sitting silently on stage while her husband, Calvin, read her words for her. Despite these pretenses toward modesty and disinterestedness, American women would continue to write prolifically and with a purpose. Phyllis Wheatley, a young woman kidnapped from Gambia as a child and brought to Boston to work as an enslaved domestic laborer, published the first volume of poetry by an African American in 1773. In it, she condemned the Atlantic slave trade and subtly criticized the racist hypocrisy of abolitionist Bostonians. One of the first bestsellers to be printed in the United States was the 1797 epistolary novel The Coquette by Hannah Webster Foster. Published anonymously, it was a fictionalized account of a woman who died at a roadside tavern after giving birth to a child out of wedlock. Foster's work drew attention to the double standard of sexual propriety that destroyed so many women's lives in her time, setting a precedent for women writers who transcended confinement to the domestic sphere by voicing their opinions in print. 19th century women not only rose to prominence as writers, they also shaped the literary marketplace and the public's tastes for textual entertainment and edification. The most widely circulated periodical in the United States prior to the Civil War was Godey's Lady's Book, which began printing bi-monthly issues in Philadelphia in 1830. During the 40 years that it was edited by the poet Sarah Josepha Hale of Mary Had a Little Lamb fame, it published dress patterns, recipes, poetry, fiction, and essays on the issues of the day by both male and female writers. But Hale had an overarching vision for the magazine as a space where female readers and writers could engage in public discourse. At a time when the middle and upper-class white women who were Hale's primary readership were most often relegated to the separate sphere of the home, the magazine culture envisioned by Hale eased their isolation and gave them a place to think about and engage with the broader world without compromising the mandates that women be domestic, submissive, and private. Though Hale was the most successful and visible editor of her time, male or female, she was hardly alone. The literary scholar Patricia Oker has identified more than 600 19th century women editors who published periodicals ranging from children's magazines to law reviews, to medical journals, to political papers. Women were so professionally active in the literary sphere that their presence there became something of a joke among women writers themselves. The first story in this volume is Catherine Maria Sedgwick's Cacoethes Scribendi. The title is Latin for mania for writing. Sedgwick was a literary power broker herself, albeit on a slightly smaller scale than a figure like Hale. Her 18...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?